At 3 in the morning, my best friend's daughter called me crying. She'd escaped to a friend's house. Then she sent bruises and a recording. I pressed play and heard my best friend say, "Just take it." I stopped the recording. For several seconds, I couldn't move. My phone was still in my hand. Hattie was still on the other end of the call. But all I could hear was Valerie's voice repeating in my head. I had known Valerie for almost 20 years. I knew how she sounded when she was tired. I knew her nervous laugh. I knew the sharper edge her voice got when she was angry, but trying not to show it. There was no mistaking her. She had been there. Her daughter was terrified. Her boyfriend, Gideon, was furious. And Valerie had been standing close enough for her voice to be caught clearly on the recording. I forced myself to focus. "Hattie, are you still at your friend's house?" "Yes." "Is Gideon there?" "No." "Is your mom there?" "No." "Are you safe right now?" "Yes." That was the first thing I needed to know. Everything else could come after. What happened? She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she told me Gideon had woken her up in the middle of the night because he thought she hadn't cleaned the kitchen properly. It started with yelling. Then it escalated. Hattie had managed to record part of what happened on her phone. Afterward, she got out of the house and went somewhere she felt safe. Then she called me. She had already sent pictures. There were obvious marks on her arm and across her back. I stared at them while she talked. I didn't need to ask whether she was exaggerating. I didn't need to interpret anything. Something serious had happened. "Has Gideon done this before?" I asked. There was a pause. "Yes." "How many times?" "I don't know." That answer hit me harder than any number could have. "I don't know" meant she wasn't counting anymore. I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind for months. "Does he hurt your mom too?" "I don't think so." "You've never seen it?" "No." Then Hattie added quietly, "But she's seen what he does to me." I shut my eyes. For months, I had been worried that Valerie was trapped in a dangerous relationship. That night, I realized her daughter had been trapped in it too. And unlike Valerie, Hattie didn't have the freedom to simply walk away. I had known Hattie since she was little. Valerie and I lived far apart for much of her childhood, so I wasn't there constantly. But I saw her enough to watch her personality take shape. She was observant. A little cautious. Funny once she trusted you. When she was younger, I occasionally brought her along on trips with my nieces and nephews. She was the kid who would sit quietly while everyone else argued, then suddenly say the one thing that proved she had understood the situation better than all of us. She remembered everything too. Apparently, she had remembered something about me. That if she ever truly needed an adult to believe her, I would. I wish she had never needed to find out whether that was true. When Gideon first entered Valerie's life, I didn't immediately dislike him. I barely knew him. Valerie sounded happy. She talked about how attentive he was and how much he understood her. Sometimes she even sounded defensive about him before anybody had criticized him. "He's been through a lot. He takes care of us. You'd like him if you actually knew him." I wanted to believe her. Why wouldn't I? But things slowly started changing. Our video calls became less frequent. Then one afternoon, Valerie was walking through the house during a call when I noticed damage on the wall behind her. It looked like a hole. I didn't say anything while we were talking because I didn't know whether Gideon was nearby. I took a screenshot. After the call ended, I sent it to her. "Was that a hole in the wall?" She took a while to answer. "Yeah, he's going to fix it." I typed back. "How did it happen?" Another delay. Then Valerie told me Gideon had been having a terrible night because his father had recently died. That still wasn't an answer. I asked more directly whether Gideon had caused the damage. She never really confirmed it. She never denied it either. She just said he was going through something difficult and told me not to worry. After that, our video calls mostly disappeared. Phone calls became the norm. Then even those became less frequent. Whenever I tried to check on her, Valerie had an explanation ready. Gideon was stressed. He was misunderstood. Their relationship was fine. I was worrying about nothing. Sometimes I questioned myself. Maybe I was seeing danger because I had seen too much of it before. I knew how complicated unhealthy relationships could become. I also knew I wasn't inside Valerie's home. So instead of telling her what I thought she should do, I kept the door open. "If you need me, call. If something happens, call. If you ever need somewhere to go, call." She always told me she was fine. Eventually, I stopped pushing as hard. That decision bothered me now. But sitting on the phone with Hattie at 3 in the morning, regret wasn't useful. She needed something practical from me. I asked who else knew what had happened. My aunt, Phoebe. She was Hattie's paternal aunt, the sister of Hattie's late father, Reed. After Reed died, Phoebe became one of the most consistent adults in Hattie's life. Hattie spent most weekends with her and often saw her during the week too. Phoebe also handled matters connected to what Reed had left behind for his daughter. She wasn't a distant relative. She was family Hattie trusted. Is Phoebe coming? I asked. She's trying. Where is she? Out of town. That was the problem. The one weekend when Hattie desperately needed her, Phoebe happened to be hundreds of miles away. Then Hattie asked me, "Can you call CPS?" Yes. I didn't hesitate. Then she said, "Can you wait until Aunt Phoebe gets here?" That did make me stop. Not because I planned to avoid the report. I was going to make it. But Hattie explained that police had already been involved in their home before. That was the first time I had heard that. Before tonight? Yes. Was CPS involved then? I don't think so. She was frightened that authorities might arrive before Phoebe did and move her somewhere unfamiliar while they figured out what to do. Right then, Hattie was already out of Gideon's house. She had reached a friend's place. She was not with him. Phoebe was trying to get back as fast as possible. I told her, "I am going to make the report. But until your aunt gets there, stay where you are." I will. Don't go back home for anything. I won't. If Gideon contacts you, don't meet him. Okay. Then I asked, "Has your mom called?" Another pause. Yes. What did she say? She wants me to come home. Did you tell her where you are? No. I hated how relieved that made me feel. A child should not need to hide her location from her mother. Then Hattie asked something I wasn't prepared for. Do you think Mom's going to hate me? I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to promise her that Valerie would wake up the next morning, understand exactly what she had allowed, and choose her daughter. But I didn't know that. So I said, "I don't know how your mom is going to react." Hattie didn't say anything. But listen to me. Whatever happens next is not because you asked for help. She started crying again. You didn't create this situation. You got yourself somewhere safe. That was the right thing to do. I just didn't know who else to call. That sentence almost broke me. I managed to keep my voice calm until the call ended. Then I sat there staring at my phone. For months, I had been worried about Valerie. Was Gideon controlling her? Was he isolating her? Was she afraid of him? Those questions still mattered. But Hattie's call forced a different question in front of all of them. What happens when the person you are worried about starts allowing their child to suffer too? Valerie knew my history. She knew I had grown up around situations where adults ignored obvious problems. She knew several people in our circle had similar experiences. Over the years, we had supported community efforts for vulnerable kids and people trying to escape unsafe homes. Valerie had heard those stories. She had listened to people explain exactly what it felt like when adults looked away. That was why hearing her voice on the recording felt almost impossible. Just take it. I couldn't reconcile those words with the person I had known. I spent the rest of the morning checking my phone every few minutes. Phoebe couldn't find a flight. So she rented a car and started driving. Almost 600 miles. Apparently, this was the first weekend in nearly a year when Hattie hadn't already been expected to spend most of her time with Phoebe. The timing was awful. But Phoebe drove anyway. For hours. I tried to eat something and barely touched it. I kept thinking about all the warning signs I had rationalized. The damaged wall. The disappearing video calls. Valerie pulling away from people. Even her relationship with her own father, Calvin, had changed. She had cut him off. That had always seemed strange to me because Calvin had been the kind of father who showed up. Not perfect. Just dependable. When I questioned Valerie about the distance between them, she brushed me off. Not everyone can be a saint. I remember thinking that was an odd thing to say. Nobody had called him a saint. I had only asked why she had stopped speaking to him. Now I wondered whether the isolation had been part of something larger. But I didn't know. And I was determined not to turn suspicions into facts just because they fit the story. All I knew for certain was what Hattie had shown me. That was enough. Eventually, Phoebe called. The first thing she said was, "I have her." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "She's with you." "Yes." "She's safe." "Yes." That was the moment I made the report. I told Child Protective Services exactly what Hattie had told me. I explained the pictures, the recording, the earlier concerns I had about the damaged wall. I told them Hattie was now with her paternal aunt. I also explained that Hattie believed police had been called to the home before, but that, as far as she knew, child protection had never become involved. I didn't embellish anything. There was no reason to. The situation was serious enough without exaggeration. They told us an investigator would follow up quickly. When the call ended, I expected to feel relieved. Instead, I felt hollow. I had just reported one of my oldest friends. Someone I loved. I was angry with Valerie, but the love didn't disappear simply because I wanted it to. That made everything messier. I remembered old conversations. Road trips. Years of stupid jokes. Moments when Valerie had shown up for me. Then I remembered Hattie crying. I remembered the recording. Those memories now had to exist beside each other. Later that day, Phoebe called me again. Hattie was resting. Phoebe sounded exhausted. Then she said, "You've missed a lot." That sentence made my stomach drop. What do you mean? Things have been bad for a while. She started telling me what had happened during the years when Valerie and I gradually lost contact. Not long after Gideon became serious with Valerie, Hattie's school performance started falling. Then she began missing classes. At first, people blamed grief. Her father had died. Her home life had changed. She was getting older. There were plenty of explanations. But the absences continued until the school system became involved. Eventually, there were truancy proceedings. That was when Phoebe began keeping Hattie much more often. Most afternoons. Nearly every weekend. Hattie could spend hours at Phoebe's place, but Valerie still expected her to sleep at home much of the time. I asked why. Phoebe said, "I've been wondering the same thing." The more she talked, the clearer the pattern became. Hattie had been spending as much time away from Valerie's house as she could without openly refusing to return. And according to Phoebe, Valerie had changed too. She had become harsher, more defensive, sometimes cruel toward Hattie. When Hattie complained about Gideon, Valerie blamed her for creating tension. When Phoebe questioned anything, Valerie accused her of interfering. Every disagreement somehow came back to Hattie being difficult. Phoebe said, "She's like a different person." I asked whether she knew why. She didn't. We wondered whether something else might be contributing to Valerie's behavior, but we had no proof of anything. So I left it there. Speculation wasn't going to help Hattie. Then Phoebe brought up the previous police incident. Hattie told me about that. I thought CPS would get involved. They didn't. Not that I can tell. Phoebe had been trying to understand why. She still didn't have an answer. I asked what exactly had happened. She only told me what she knew for certain. It had been serious enough for police to respond. Hattie had been frightened. But whatever came afterward hadn't changed her living arrangement. That was when I understood something important. The call Hattie made to me wasn't the beginning. It was the point where she finally stopped trusting the adults around her to fix things quietly. She had reached the point where she knew she needed evidence. She needed someone outside the house. She needed someone who couldn't be convinced that everything was fine. Within the next couple of days, things moved quickly. Phoebe called me with another update. Valerie and Gideon are both in custody. I thought I had heard her wrong. Valerie too? Yes. The allegations involving Valerie were connected to endangering Hattie and interfering with the situation when authorities became involved. Gideon was facing far more serious allegations related to what had happened to Hattie. Then Phoebe told me something that stunned both of us. Gideon had multiple parole violations. 3. I asked her to repeat it. 3. That's what it says. For what? I don't know yet. That opened another door neither of us knew how to walk through. What exactly had Valerie known about his past? Had Gideon lied to her? Had she discovered things and chosen not to tell anybody? We didn't know. I tried looking up information myself and quickly learned how difficult it could be without knowing where previous cases had happened. Records were scattered. Different counties handled things differently. I stopped before I convinced myself I could solve his entire history from my phone. The authorities could handle Gideon. My concern was Hattie. Phoebe already had a lawyer and was now seriously thinking about pursuing custody. Even then, she hesitated. I don't want Hattie thinking I'm trying to steal her from her mother. I understood why she was conflicted. Valerie was still Hattie's mom. Whatever happened next would affect their relationship for years. So I asked Phoebe one question. If someone told you Hattie had to go back to that house tomorrow, would you be comfortable with it? She was silent. Then she said no. That was the answer. I told her I would speak to the lawyer and provide whatever I had. It wasn't much. A few old conversations. The screenshot of the damaged wall. Messages where I asked Valerie whether she felt safe. Messages where she avoided answering. For a long time, I thought those texts meant nothing because Valerie had never admitted anything. Now they mattered for a different reason. They showed that people had noticed changes. They showed that questions had been asked. Valerie had been given chances to say something was wrong. Whether she couldn't or wouldn't, I still didn't know. One thing became very clear, though. I was not the hero of the story. People told me I had done the right thing by making the report. I appreciated that. But Hattie had done the hardest part herself. She recognized that what was happening wasn't normal. She left the house. She protected evidence. She contacted Phoebe. Then, when Phoebe was hundreds of miles away trying to get back, Hattie remembered that I was somebody she could call. Phoebe later told me she had offered to contact me herself. Hattie said, "I'll do it." That stayed with me. She had just gone through a terrifying night and was still planning her own next move. I was proud of her. I was also furious that circumstances had forced her to become that capable. When I finally spoke to Hattie again, she sounded tired but calmer. Then she said something completely ordinary. "Aunt Phoebe says I don't have to ride the bus for a while." She sounded genuinely excited. "The bus? I hate that bus." I laughed. She laughed too. For maybe 30 seconds, none of the bigger things existed. No investigators. No lawyers. No custody questions. Just a kid complaining about the school bus. That moment affected me more than I expected. It reminded me what her life was supposed to be about. Homework. Friends. School. Annoying bus rides. Normal arguments about normal things. She shouldn't have been learning when to secretly press record. She shouldn't have been calculating which adult was safest to call at 3 in the morning. She shouldn't have had to wonder whether her mother would hate her for asking for help. The legal situation was still uncertain. Phoebe could keep Hattie safe for the moment, but there would be investigations and court proceedings before anything became permanent. There were questions about the earlier police response. Questions about Gideon's history. Questions about Valerie's role. And eventually, there would be questions only Hattie could answer about what kind of relationship, if any, she wanted with her mother. I didn't want anybody deciding that for her. Valerie might someday understand the damage. She might apologize. She might get help. She might deny everything. I had no idea. I also didn't know exactly what Gideon had done to Valerie emotionally behind closed doors. The warning signs were there. The isolation. The excuses. The damaged wall. The way her world seemed to shrink after he entered it. Maybe she had been frightened for a long time. If so, I hope she gets whatever help she needs. But that possibility doesn't erase what happened to Hattie. Both things can matter at once. Valerie may have been trapped in a destructive relationship. And she was still responsible for protecting her daughter. That is the part one can't soften just because I once loved the person she was. There comes a moment when understanding someone's fear cannot require ignoring the harm being done to someone more vulnerable. Hattie had no control over who Valerie brought into the house. She had no control over Gideon's temper. She had no control over whether her mother believed her. The one thing she eventually controlled was whether she stayed silent. She chose not to. If Valerie ever calls me and demands to know why I reported her, I don't think I'll argue. I won't give a speech. I'll tell her the truth. Her daughter called me because she was afraid. I believed her. That's it. By the time my phone rang, the situation already existed. The recording already existed. The pictures already existed. The previous incidents had already happened. My report didn't create any of those things. It simply meant there was finally a record outside that house that couldn't be explained away. Right now, Hattie is safe with Phoebe. There are investigators involved. Phoebe has legal help. Adults are finally paying attention. That isn't a perfect ending. It isn't even really an ending. Hattie still has a lot ahead of her. But there is something different now. She knows that if she says something is wrong, someone will listen. She knows she does not have to protect adults from the consequences of their own choices. And for the first time in a long time, she can go to sleep somewhere without wondering what mood Gideon is in. I used to think calling Child Protective Services on someone I loved would feel like betrayal. Now I think the real betrayal happened inside that house long before I made the call. I still care about Valerie. I still hope she finds a way to understand how far things went. But if protecting that friendship ever requires me to pretend Hattie should have endured one more night, then there is no friendship left to protect. Hattie asked for help. This time, someone listened. And I'm left with one question I still can't answer. If a parent is trapped in a controlling relationship but keeps allowing their partner to harm their child, are they still only a victim? Or at some point do they become responsible too?